everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really delighted on behalf of the AIPMO book review team to welcome Vip Vyas, one of our authors from one of the books that we've reviewed as a team. I'm joined today with Ritu Chandla, our chief editor from the book review team, and one of my colleagues on the team, Jonathan Norman. Welcome, everyone.
Thanks for inviting us.
Thanks, Maggie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we set up the book review process so that we could help identify interesting new thought leadership on project management. And your book stood out, Vip, as a very fresh and different take on the project management profession. So really delighted that you're here to join us. You're no stranger to mega projects and all the ups and downs and challenges of project management. I wonder if you could first of all just give us a very brief overview of your background and what's led you to this point today.
Yeah, thanks. It's a good question, Maggie. I mean, like a lot of people in projects, I fell in by mistake or by accident, right? It wasn't sort of a big scripted thing. I was working about 3 decades ago in what's called enterprise transformation. So I was working in large-scale corporate transformation, a lot of work with BP and Chevron, and I literally went from the corporate level into projects. And with both those organizations, I ended up doing a lot of work in the sort of the upstream, the midstream, what are called pipelines, and then refining. And that was kind of my entry point into the whole field. That was about 30 years ago. About 20 years ago, when I moved to Hong Kong, and as you're probably aware, Hong Kong's not really an oil and gas hub. So when I got there, I ended up sort of pivoting into airports, mining, renewables, iconic buildings, everything that's sort of associated with China and the growth of the Southeast Asian region. So that's the sort of the background to it. Does that cover what? Yeah. Okay.
Great. Yeah. And since then, you've now been working both within the industry as a practitioner and also getting involved in education and project management.
Yeah, I mean, look, the thing I found was, when you are in any industry or any discipline for a certain period of time, you start to notice patterns, right? And for me, the patterns in mega projects is that we've got a kind of result that we want to produce at the beginning of the project, and then we end up sort of somewhere around here. And when you look at the gap between where you are here and where you wanted it to be, when I looked at all of the analysis, and there's decades of that, it seemed like we were regurgitating the same set of answers, but the answers didn't really seem to make a huge difference. So that was really when I started to look at this, the idea that maybe there's a huge blind spot within the entire industry, something we don't have our attention on. And when we started to do the research and the diagnostics, what I found was, and we've got this in the book, that about 80% of the time people are dealing with issues with other people or other organizations. The technical side of mega projects is maybe about 15 to 20%, and we've repeated this, in survey after survey. So I know that where the book's focused is the right area. But it's, if you look at most of the practitioner training, it tends to be more on the technical side rather than how do you read very complex organizations and the kind of perfect storms that get created when these organizations come together.
Okay, so you wrote this this book, The Gorilla in the Cockpit, which is interestingly named, and your main premise in the book is about looking at that importance of human behavior and the cognitive biases that we carry with us into these projects and across the organizations. I wonder, was there any particular trigger that led you to writing the book?
I think it was when I was looking at the what was written out there seemed to be almost nothing around this phenomenon of the biggest, when I speak to project directors, their biggest challenge actually isn't technology. They the first thing they come in with is, how do I assemble a committed organization? I've got 10,000 people, I've got 500 players, different organizations coming into this. How do I bring a level of coherence? And how do I get them to own the result? And how do I overcome the commercial gaming that could take place? So those are most of the time I'm dealing with that. I'm not dealing with, whether, this particular methodology is working well or not. The conversations always seem to start with people, issues related to people, the politics of the project, and it just seemed like there was an area that was totally missed by by what was out there already. So that was a trigger. It wasn't like I had one moment where it was like, oh my God, I've got to write it. It was more like, this thing is brewing and it's so slowly coming together, and how come nobody's really writing about it? So that was really the sort of the ultimate thing, I guess.
Excellent. And Jonathan, I'll just bring you in there, as a practitioner yourself and involved in the professional bodies too. What's your questions for Vip?
Well, I'm particularly interested in the organisational aspects of what you're talking about, Vip. I mean, you talked about your experience with project leaders saying, how do I get my arms around this kind of amorphous blob that is the project organisation, and make sure that we're all working in the same direction, that we're working collaboratively, and that we're all kind of telling the same truths. And I guess I'm really interested in how do you set up the project structures and the project organisation to enable this, what you call this black and white box thinking, which I think is a great way of describing the ideas behind the book.
Yeah, that's a great question, Jonathan. I mean, the way we're doing it at the moment, if I look at all the programs that we're involved with, and some of these are 9 to 10 years in length. And what we've done with those is to institutionalize what I call a black box review process. So that happens every quarter. So the way those clients are now looking at the black box is that it's actually a risk governance issue, not something that they're kind of adding on. And if I look at it, because the nature of the conversations and the process, it kind of reveals a lot of stuff that's in the background that are generally ignored or overlooked. But it's one of those things that if you keep on ignoring it, suddenly becomes, some projects have this phenomenon at the board level where the risk only looks sort of a 0.5 millimeter thick or 0.5 millimeter wide. But the problem is that it runs 3 miles deep, and as it goes deeper, it gets wider and wider. So I think the board, the executive teams, even the project leadership teams find it very valuable to be able to get an access to really what's there in the thinking and the in the sort of the remote parts of the supply chain, for instance, or a vendor that might be in a geographically distant place, or even just their immediate team. So I think what it does is that that process catalyzes a set of very authentic conversations at the project level. And some of those conversations are quite tough conversations, because you can imagine some of them are about how the team itself is performing. So it's not just about issues which are sort of in third party things. The other thing so we started off with those reviews, and what that's evolved into is this recognition amongst the project team that we need a sort of a capability building within the team to be able to detect these black box features as they arise. So we've created something called a performance acceleration program, which is at the moment these are run within the project itself. So it develops the project leadership capability, not just at the top, but right the way through the project. So that's the way we've been doing it at the moment. And it seems to be working, right? Because I think the feedback is that this is really valuable, because we're having key conversations which, if we'd ignored them, would have turned into problems maybe 6 to 12 months down the line. So that's how it's sort of structured.
One of the things I really liked about the book is the fact that it's very practical. You have this description of the project review process and sort of 10-step checklist for things for the project manager to pay attention to. I wonder if there's any one particular tip that you would give anyone in the project management profession for how to respond to the importance of this aspect of the program?
Yeah, I think that where I'd start, Maggie, is when you're in those meetings, just looking at what's not being said and what are we stepping over. Because if you can actually just be in the meeting with people and notice what's going on for them, that in itself is a very, very good starting point. It may sound like a very simple thing to do, but it's actually good to get that present. Because if you've got a condition that, if you've got a team of people coming in and what's already there is fear, they're worried about their own personal futures, and then you're trying to have a conversation on top of that foundation, it's very, very difficult, because what you're going to see in the entire meeting is a set of survival patterns playing out. And if nobody's noticing that and kind of just at least pointing to it, what you'll have is a set of conversations. And I'm sure you've been in meetings that these things happen every day, where there's what's being said and there's what people really think about what's being said in the background. And that's a very, very different world out there. And pretty much, if you look at it, what's happening in the background tends to sort of shape what's happening in the foreground. And I think it's really, and mostly, I mean, I'd say probably 99% of the time, when we first go into meetings with a new client, they don't have their attention of what's happening in the background. They have their attention on the political pressure, what it's going to look like in the media. I've got an array of indicators, and they're mostly red. And I don't like that. And how the hell do I survive it? And who do I blame? And what does it say in the NEC contract or FIDIC or whatever it is that, so it tends to be more orchestrated around that. And then, of course, you get these, then you get the counterplay of that, which is people become defensive, they get contractual, and then you start to see the results that, that we've been getting for decades.
Yeah, I think that's very powerful, just that awareness of what's not being said.
Yeah, just and it's it's a fundamental inauthenticity, that you've got a bunch of very, very smart people in the room, and then there's a hidden feature that nobody's discussing. Yeah. And if you unlock that just those set of conversations, a whole new possibility arises. That's what becomes available.
Yeah, the courage to make that visible and make that transparent and work through it as a team. Yeah,
that's right. Because otherwise what you see is a group of people, everyone's afraid, and they're sitting there together pretending not to be, right?
Yeah. I can imagine how that would completely change the dynamic.
It does.
So you had a top 10 checklist in your book. Ritu, do you want to speak with Vip about our book review process?
Yeah,
sure, Maggie.
Sure.
Okay, yeah. So Vip, I have just one question, and it is about AIPMO's book review process. First of all, thank you for sending us a copy of your book. Do you think the 10-point scale that we use fairly shows the strengths and the areas for improvement? And also, how do you see it when you compare it with other feedback that you have received?
Yeah, I mean, look, I know we spoke about this before, and I was actually, the more I reflect on it, I think it's a very, very, the dimensions are really good if you're viewing the book or evaluating it from a publishing perspective, right? Because when I look at it, it's like, that, and I found it very valuable. I mean, and so, and I could see gaps which were very useful. When we wrote the book, the intention of the book was to have the industry think differently and bring a level of excellence that is missing. So when I started to look at it from a more deeper perspective, I was thinking that there may be some dimensions that could be added or augmented. When I buy a book, one of the things I'm looking at is what difference does that book make to this field? So I think there's probably there's something in that dimension which I think could be added. The other thing I think in Gorilla, I mean, it was written it was published in 2022. it points to the political dimension and projects. I think nowadays, if you look at mega projects, it's very naive to ignore the geopolitical space. So, and when I talk to project, even quite senior people in organizations, they're aware of the huge impact this era that we're in. Because, within overnight, your entire supply chain can get impacted depending on what's being said and what policies are coming out. So I think in a way that, again, that dimension of the stakeholder impact, I don't think it's covered so there's kind of aspects of where the book's leaning, and I'm not talking about just guerrilla. I can imagine every author, when they have a book in mind, they've probably got some intention they're trying to fulfill inside of writing it. So I just felt like it was good from a publishing angle, like really good from that. I think there's probably some additional dimensions around the intent of the book and whether that intent got fulfilled well or not. So I think that's, that's just my thinking. And I don't know, those two immediately come out. But again, each author will have their own particular, angle from which they're looking. And so I think that something along those lines could also be valuable for the reader. Because if I'm picking up the book, I really want to know, okay, I got the publishing part, it's very valuable. It has to be crisp, it has to be clean, it's got to be something new, it's got to be innovative. But I'm also looking at, like, what fun, is this a regurgitation of what I already know? Or is this book taking me into a new dimension of thinking? And so that's the only thing I'd add to that.
I think those are some great points, and we regularly have our book team meeting, and Jonathan is also, part of it, a very senior person in the book team. So these are something that we can actually discuss in the team, and it's a very good feedback, Vip. Thank you.
Thanks.
Perhaps that same question of what's not being said might also be appropriate for us to be thinking about.
Yeah.
You touched on it there. There's been huge change in recent years, even in the couple of years since the book was published. And you did start to touch on that at the end of the book about emerging technologies and how this might impact future of project portfolio management. I just wonder what your thoughts are on that now. What do you see as the key challenges and emerging trends for practitioners to be aware of in this space?
Yeah, I think, look, I think the most obvious one is people are obviously worried about their jobs, right? That's kind of that's a concern everywhere. I think there's my experience when I'm working at when you're at the board level, for instance, or the sponsor level, the understanding of AI is very, very patchy, right? Very patchy indeed. And I think what we need to do is to get, the way I kind of explain it to people is to say, listen, this system is nothing more than a pattern matching system. It looks at data, it looks at patterns, right? It's got a tendency to hallucinate, which means that when you ask a question, it may not produce the same response. But the other thing is, I say, look, it's also trained on a database which has got a cutoff point. Now, that's important because if you're using it to make decisions at the senior level and something in the market changes quite dramatically after the cutoff date of the AI, then what's going to come out is going to be out of sync. So I think that's one, I think, big thing. The other thing is that board members have a fiduciary duty. And what that means in practice is that just because you're using the AI, and it doesn't matter how good it is, unless you're clear about the guardrails that have been put in place and you understand how the mechanism works and how it comes to the answers, you can't get off the hook. You're still liable. So I think, and I think it's a huge gap at the moment. It's an emerging gap. I can't even quote a piece of research, but I'm sure I've picked up somewhere in LinkedIn, like the average board member spends less than 2 minutes on AI per week or per month or whatever it is. So it's I think it's a huge risk, right? Its application is everywhere. You see it everything from, when I'm in Hong Kong, I went to the construction industry conference, I was really impressed by the use of those AI cameras on site, how it picks up safety incidents, digital twins. I mean, it's everywhere, and you've got at the moment this combination of robotics with AI, and you're getting these mega factories in China which are developing, modular at scale. So it's pretty impressive. But again, I think there's a black box dimension to that as well. And certainly in the project we're working on, where they're using modular, we're using all of this technology, where there's single points of failure are actually comes down to people and people stepping over things. So I think it's going to be a huge movement forward in terms of the industry, but I think we've got to be kind of smart about it and not just assume that because it's coming up with the answer, it means that it's the truth. The other thing, I think if you map it down the line, the more we rely on it and the less people we recruit into the industry, I anticipate a vacuum coming through, actually. And that vacuum could be in the next 20 years, where we're so reliant on this thing. Do we have the competency to actually oversee it? And I think, I mean, maybe these are quite high level observations, but I think they're going to be relevant as we move forward.
Absolutely, definitely see them playing out in practice. The more that the technology is being embedded, and the more critical it is to have that awareness and critical thinking on what the data is that the models are based on. And yes, it's a good reminder for any of us in leadership roles in organisations to really take note and inform ourselves and make sure that we are not caught out and not leaving it too much to the AI to shape our decisions.
So
that's an important warning.
And also, Maggie, and nowadays, where pace is so important, I think people sometimes, when you're trying to do things at speed, sometimes you trip over and break things, right? So I think it's important that we, sometimes people I think can go straight to the AI just for a quick answer, but I think we need to just be cognizant of all of those things.
Awareness of the limitations of it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's been so lovely speaking to you, Vip. What's next on the agenda for you? Is there anything that you want to share with any of the audience watching this? As you've got any speaking engagements coming up soon, or projects that you're working on? What's the next publication going to be? Just anything that you want to share about how people can engage with you.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, obviously they can reach out to me through LinkedIn or through AIPMO. I mean, in terms of work, I'm looking at I'm writing a piece around the impact of election cycles on mega projects. So that I think is one thing. And I've got a second book which is close to completion, and it's really taking the idea of gorilla in the cockpit, but elevating it to the level of society.